Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're excited to welcome back Jeremy Richter, attorney and now author of the book, Building a Better Law Practice, soon to be published by the ABA. Your Law School Toolbox hosts are Alison Monahan, and normally I'm with Lee Burgess. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so that you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. Together, we're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. I also run the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we would love to hear from you. With that, let's get started. Welcome back. Today, we're excited to welcome Jeremy Richter, attorney and now author of the book Building a Better Law Practice, which is going to be published by the ABA around the beginning of July. So welcome, Jeremy.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here.
It's our pleasure to have you. So the last time we spoke, we were talking about being an introverted lawyer, which is a great episode. We will link to it. But tell me about what you've been up to professionally since then, and if you would give our listeners kind of a sense of your overall background and where you're coming from.
All right. So what I've been doing lately is a lot of writing for my book that's coming out, which fits really well with my introverted tendencies. And I am an insurance defense lawyer in Birmingham. Most of the work that I do is defending car wrecks, general liability, premises liability stuff with stores when customers slip and fall, and some workers' comp stuff here and there. And so that involves a lot of written discovery and depositions and occasionally some trial work, although most everything settles before it ever gets that far.
Exactly. And how long have you been doing this?
I am in year number 6. So I started in 2012, right when there were still no jobs for people coming out of law school. So that was fun.
Mm-hmm. And I think we talked about that a little bit on the other podcast about how you got that first job. So we're not going to necessarily revisit that. But now you're smooth sailing. Have you been at the same place your career?
Yes, I am one of, I think, probably the few people in my class who have been at the same firm for 6 years now. And, barring some unexpected things, I don't have any plans to change that ever.
Wow. Well, that's a strong statement these days.
Yeah. It fits who I am and how I like to work. Mm-hmm. And it's just been it couldn't have been a better fit for me.
That's great. Yeah. It sounds like you got pretty lucky right out of the gate.
For sure.
Would you say that this is, do you think it was kind of a lucky break, or do you think, as I recall, it doesn't seem like you had like a really strict plan for what you were going to do as soon as you graduated?
Oh, yeah, you're right. When I went into law school, I thought that I was going to do criminal prosecution. And after my first clerking summer at the district attorney's office, I knew that is not what I wanted to do. Yeah. So after that, everything was just, I didn't have any answers, but I had a bunch of questions. So I did a bunch of different clerking experiences. My third year, during the year, I clerked for a couple of solo folks, and we knew from the outset that they weren't going to be able to take me on because they just didn't have that kind of volume. Mm-hmm. But one of the folks I was working for got contacted by the managing partner at the firm where I am now saying, "Hey, do you know anybody?" And he said, "Well, yes, I do." And so we went through an interview process, and here I am.
I think that's a great story because so many people think like, oh, if I don't get a job through, on-campus recruiting, my days of working at a law firm are over, or, I'm never going to be able to get a job, or they have to plan everything out. But I think honestly, my experience in life has just been a lot of this is kind of random, and you sort of have to put yourself in a position to get that call.
I totally agree, because if I hadn't done good work and been dependable where I was, then I never would have got suggested as, he wouldn't have stuck his neck out for me and said, "I think Jeremy could handle this for you.
Right. Or never would have even met you because you were just like, oh, I don't have time to get a job. I'm too busy looking for a job. I can't actually work.
Right.
All right. So tell me a bit about this new book, Building a Better Law Practice. Who is it for and why did you decide to write it?
It is. So for a couple of years now, I've been writing a law blog. And
where can people find that?
They can find that at jeremywrichter.com.
Okay.
And so when I started that out, and part of this kind of ties into the book, especially the fourth part where I talk about marketing a bit, but insurance defense is tough. And there's a lot of gray-haired guys that have a hold on the market. And so it's hard to break in as a young lawyer to develop your own clients and develop relationships. And so I knew about me that, first of all, like we talked about last time, I'm a bit introverted, so I needed to take a different path. I don't have family connections in the Birmingham area. I don't have one of those personalities that people are just going to remember, but I do like writing, and I feel like I'm fairly good at it. And so I kind of looked around and to see where there was a hole in the market that I might be able to fill in that capacity to, I don't know, develop a platform. I didn't really have a plan for it when I started, but I wanted to do something that would build a platform for me to speak from and just give people an opportunity to learn who I am and what I have to say before I ask them to hire me to do their work. So,
which makes sense.
Yeah, so I started the blog. And then the book kind of developed out of that, because when I started writing about on the blog, a lot of it was very practice area specific. So as I did more reading, then I got a lot more interested in thinking about and writing about practice management and managing my caseload and managing my clients, which are the things that ultimately the blog has evolved into writing about those topics primarily, and that's the content that makes up the book as well.
And we're going to talk in more detail about the different parts of the book in a second. But before we do that, let me just ask you one additional question. So we've been doing a lot of kind of mistakes episodes lately on the podcast, particularly talking to an ex-Big Law recruiter about, the different mistakes people make and all kinds of, being a summer associate, an OCI, callbacks, all those kind of things. What kind of mistakes do you see young lawyers frequently making early in their careers? And how can people start to avoid not necessarily these specific pitfalls, but kind of big mistakes overall?
You could probably spend a really long time talking about that.
Well, yeah, you just answer that. How can people avoid mistakes? Come on, Jeremy, give me what you got here.
So I would say mistakes that young lawyers are making as they enter their career is thinking they know more than they do and projecting that they know more than you do.
That's a great one. Yes, definitely.
It's okay to not know answers to things. And I don't think that any reasonable employer is going to expect you to know how to practice law on day one.
Right.
Like they plan to teach you that. And so being open and coachable is hugely important. There's a lot of really important things, but if you're closed off and not able to adapt and learn as you go and be able to receive criticism and feedback, then that's really going to hinder your growth.
I think that's a great point. We were talking yesterday with someone on the podcast about those people who kind of come into firms and apparently she had one summer associate tell her on the second day, well, I'm going to be running this firm one day. And she's like, just don't do that.
Wow, that's really ambitious.
It's kind of ambitious, but it's also just sort of obnoxious. So, you don't know anything. You don't even know if you like it here.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So our point with there was just it's really not going to do anyone, any problems if you just kind of sit back and absorb things for a little while before you start making these pronouncements.
Yeah, I think that's another good point, is to absorbing things. That's a really good way to put it, is rather than coming in voicing your opinion, take the temperature of the room first.
Exactly. Yeah. Just take a step back. It's a new environment. All right. Well, let's talk now in some more detail about the different advice in your book. So you've divided it into 4 different parts, and we'll just kind of go through them and talk about each one. So in the first part, you really talk about managing clients and creating collaborative relationships. So why do you think this is so important?
All right. So the reason this is important is because if you don't have clients, then you don't have any work to do.
Very good point.
And so understanding what kind of relationship your clients want with you. And so for me, for every case, I have 2 clients. I have the insurance company that's hired me and that I have a continuing relationship with from case to case. And I also have either the individual or the corporation that I'm representing who is also my client. So it gets really interesting from that perspective. So as far as the company that hires me, the insurance company, I need to know how they want to work together and understand what their needs are so that we can have the most effective communication amongst ourselves. And usually we have a lot of cases together, and sometimes it's with the same folks, and sometimes it's with folks I haven't ever worked with before. But I just need to be really receptive and communicative for us to handle our cases in the best way possible.
Mm-hmm. And what type of things should lawyers be thinking about as they start to work directly with clients, either in this kind of institutional capacity or really literally directly with, the guy who had the accident?
Yeah. So I think that listening skills are hugely important. And recently I've had a few conversations with Jennifer Romig, who is a professor at Emory University, and she has a blog called Listening Like a Lawyer, which I think is a little bit tongue-in-cheek because historically we are not good listeners.
That's interesting, since that's kind of what we're supposed to be doing.
Right.
And she's great. She's written some stuff for us too. Love her.
Good. I really like her, and she and I are going to do some presentations at conferences on how we can use listening skills as lawyers to more effectively communicate with our clients. So I think something that's really important is listening so that we can understand our clients' needs and be able to provide the service that they need to meet those needs. And sometimes that's really case specific, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's a larger, a 20,000 foot perspective rather than the day-to-day operations.
Right. And I'd have to imagine sometimes you have some, maybe not necessarily conflict, but maybe tension between, what the guy who you're defending on that day who had this accident might want and your bigger client might want. Is that true?
It is true. And so when stuff like that happens, I tell the insured, the guy that I'm actually defending, and I've had to tell the insurance folks before also, my duty as an advocate is to the defendant. And even if I'm later going to get fired for doing what's in the defendant's best interest, that's what I have to do. And there's no question about that. There's no wavering on it. That's just the way it has to be. So, but that's something that has to be communicated to everybody is I owe this guy a zealous advocacy regardless of what is in your financial interest, right, insurance company. And so that is a really important part of in insurance defense of that line of business is taking, there's a tension there sometimes, and you have to manage it and communicate with everybody about what it means and how it's going to be handled.
Mm-hmm. And what are some ways that you think young lawyers can get better at working productively with clients if maybe this is not a skill set they feel fully comfortable with?
Sure. And it's probably not, because
why would it be?
Yes, exactly. Why would it be? I think one of the most important things I was taught early on is to respond. And this sounds really obvious, but sometimes the things that are really obvious are also obviously overlooked. Is when you get an email or you get a phone call that you can't take from a client, respond within 24 hours. And the response may even be, I'm going to need some time to get an answer for you. But your clients need to know that you're there on your radar and that you're prepared whenever they have something they need to be there for them. And, on the insurance side, I'll have clients who call me and say, hey, I've got a question about this file. It's not your file, and it may never be a case that you get, but I've got a question. So as a service to my client, since there are tons of insurance defense lawyers that they could go to, my response is always, 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 if you have any questions on whether it's something I'll ever bill a minute at a time on, call me and let me help you and answer your questions. So being responsive, being available for your clients, understanding their needs. And sometimes their needs are things that will never turn into a dollar in yours or your firm's pocket. But it's just a matter of being a good business partner with them.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, we get similar things with our students where maybe their parents want to have a question about something or somebody needs a referral for something. It's just, I'm not billing anyone for that, but that's just something you do. I mean,
Yeah. And we're, a lot of times people think of lawyers as highfalutin, really important, but we're a customer service business, and
Exactly.
We can't lose sight of that.
Yeah, and I think the best people tend to be the ones who have that desire to be helpful. And it probably doesn't just stop at things they're getting paid for.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that kind of flows into, you need to understand your client's business as a whole. Mm-hmm. Some people approach cases with a scorched earth mentality, and that can be really expensive for one thing, but also it may not serve other business goals your clients have. They may be in litigation with a business partner of theirs who they still want to do business with after this resolves, or any number of things that don't directly affect the litigation, but that need to be considered as a part of the client's relationship and how you handle cases.
Yeah, I thought that was a really good point in your book that, these are ongoing relationships, a lot of them, and you can't just blow everything up and be like, yay, we won. It's like, well, yeah, but.
That's right. Well, and legal communities are small. Unless you're in one of the larger cities.
Even for example, I worked in New York. They're still small.
Okay, so you're going to deal with the same people for 30 years. And you need to be able to have a good working relationship with those people, regardless of which side of the case you're on. They may be co-defendants or it may be opposing counsel, but they've got to be able to take you at your word. They've got to be able to work with you from one case to the next. And so burning everything to the ground isn't always a good option.
Right, unless you're going to flee the country or something. Yeah, and then go ahead, right. Have fun. But you might want to come back. So, got to be careful. All right. So the second part of the book is about more practical considerations for a legal practice. So what are the most important things that people should be thinking about here? And does this vary at all depending on the type of work environment you're in?
So probably it does, but I think the most important thing from the outset is learning your practice areas. For me, when I started practicing, I was doing almost exclusively trucking defense litigation, which involves laws and regulations that outside of, unless you're a trucker or a trucking lawyer, you'll never encounter or have any reason to know those things. And so I had to do a lot of non-billable homework to learn those things so that I could effectively handle those cases. And so I think that's probably going to be true for whether you're doing medical malpractice or products liability or mergers and acquisitions. Then there's going to be things that you need to know that you don't have any reason that you would know them at this point, and that they're just going to require a lot of effort in your off time or in non-billable time to develop that knowledge so that you can manage your cases like you need to.
For sure. I mean, I ended up being a patent litigator, and I never took a single IP class in law school. So yeah, I think almost everyone's going to I had a background for it. I probably should have taken those classes, but they didn't seem interesting. So I didn't. I think everybody, I remember doing interviews in different firms and talking to people, and they're like, oh, I do like, you remember those like car wheels that were tires that were blowing up? That's what I do. And it's like, okay, if I worked with you, I would know nothing about this, but I would have to get up to speed on it.
Right. So I had a case where this tractor trailer caught on fire going down the highway, and it turned out that oil bearings had leaked in the wheels and everything caught fire and just totally burned it up. Well, I don't know anything about wheel bearings, or didn't. I do now.
Right. I'm like, is that a part of the wheel, I guess? Right. Maybe the thing that turns. Yeah.
And so, I do some construction defect work. And so I know a lot more about windows and roofs and things that I never thought I would know, but you learn along the way, and it takes some effort, and it can be kind of fun to learn about new things, even if you'll never ever use them again or never need to know it. But it's just a part of the practice.
Yeah, I remember when I was clerking, we had some patent case about window frames, and we had the actual like piece of the window sitting on my desk. And I really wanted to take it apart to look at it more carefully, and the judge would never let me do it.
Well, so I have, from the fire case, I'm looking at it right now, this piece of aluminum that melted because everything that wasn't made of steel just burned up. And there were puddles of aluminum from engine blocks of cars and everything else under there. So yeah, I kept that as one of my little trophies.
Yeah, I think the one case I did that went to trial was a hardware patent case about voltage regulators on a chip. And I mean, let me tell you, like nobody in the courtroom except the two people who were like, electrical engineers turned lawyers had any actual clue what was going on here, but we all had to fake it.
Well, yeah, that's another thing is like people tell you all these things you need to do to keep jury's attention and be interesting. And I even have some of that in this book and on the blog. And sometimes, you know what? It's just not very interesting.
We had some great experts with fascinating. A friend of mine actually, who's a lawyer, who was also working at the firm and just happened to be at this trial, was like, I just feel like I saw Mr. Wizard. I never understood electricity before. These slides are amazing.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, it was. There's a lot of money spent on this trial. We had some good documents.
That's good.
All right. Anyway, so back to practical considerations. What else should people be thinking about besides basically being really good at the areas that you're practicing in?
Well, and I think we hit on this a little bit, but some of it just takes time to learn and to get experience. But learning your client's business, which I think we hit on already, but understanding your client's business, which takes time, is another thing that just can help you be a better advocate for them.
And what do you think are some good ways to do that? I mean, can you ask the clients to kind of explain it to you, or is this something you need to do some sleuthing on your own?
I think probably both of those things.
Mm-hmm.
When I got into insurance defense, I didn't know, like I had car insurance, but right. I didn't know what uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage is. And so some of it is stuff you just have to learn and figure out. But there's also things like how insurance companies have to evaluate risk and why it's really important for my budgets to be accurate or for my risk evaluations in cases to be accurate, because it affects how they do their business. And so for a long time, and I think a lot of insurance defense lawyers don't understand what, particularly those two things, budgeting and case evaluations, how it can affect their clients. And so if you have a good relationship with a client, that's something that they want to talk about and say, okay, here's why this is important, because we all know we have to do it on every case, but I may not have a good understanding of, if I don't do it well or if I don't do it timely, what negative effects that can have on my client. So yeah, clients want you, if you have a good client and a good relationship, they want you to have an understanding of some of these things we ask you to do seem arbitrary, but here's how they affect me. And so I think that is something that you can have a conversation about.
Okay. Interesting. And then the third part of the book, you really start talking about this, how to develop your skills and really manage your caseload as a young lawyer. So From your perspective, other than, like what we just talked about, actually knowing the law, what are the most important types of skills that people should be focusing on at this point? There are a lot of different things they could be doing.
Yeah. Writing is really important, and some schools, in my experience, do a better job of teaching this than others. But something that's taken me a while to figure out is, what do judges want? And judges are mostly your audience. When you're writing a brief or whatever, you've got to use plain language, and you only have a limited amount of time that they're paying attention to what you've written. And so you have to be concise and punchy and get to the point of what you're saying using the plainest language possible. And so writing skills are really important. I feel like there's something that people who read more tend to have better writing skills. So while it's not, reading necessarily isn't a skill that you have to know, the more you read and the higher quality stuff that you're reading, it's going to help you be a better writer just by absorbing all those things.
I think that's right. Just by osmosis, you at least start to, I would even sometimes just read briefs and things, maybe not for fun, but kind of for fun, just to sort of check them out and see like, oh, how does this person do this? Or how does that person do this? So I think you can. The great thing about the legal system is a lot of this stuff actually is available. So you can always go back and look at it if you're just kind of curious.
That's right. And there's a lot of examples of like really bad stuff too, that you can look at and say, okay, this was not good. And that's another thing, is to learn, we have to be good self-evaluators. Mm-hmm. You might get feedback from your partner that you work for or your client, but it's far better for you to be able to look at the work that you're doing and, first of all, proofread it. Mm-hmm. And second of all, say, okay, here's what's good about this. Here's what's bad about it. Or when you do get feedback, that you take the time to internalize and make changes as you go along.
Yeah, this is something we're always trying to work on with our bar students, because of course, everyone wants, I want feedback on my writing. It's like, well, we can't be there in the exam with you. Like, you have to learn to do this for yourself, basically on the fly. Like, that's one of our goals here, is that you can evaluate how you're doing. You don't always have to turn to someone else. And it's hard.
And it's hard.
Yeah.
It is hard. And it has to be intentional. And like, that's something when I started writing this book, and a lot of it was already written and I just had to make it better, is you can't be afraid to look at your own writing and slash and burn some of it.
Oh, for sure.
And so that's true of whether you're learning if you're a litigator, if you're preparing for voir dire or opening statements, you have to be really self-effacing and look at that stuff and say, okay, here's what went well, here's what went poorly, and based on that, here's what I can do differently next time to get a different result. And that's some of the stuff I talk about in the book, about doing after action reviews, where you sit down and figure out. And one of my partners that I work with, she is prone to saying, there's the trial you had, the trial you thought you were going to have, and the trial you wish you had.
Right.
And that's all really important in a debriefing process, which you can apply to any area of your practice to figure out, what do we need to do differently next time, or what did we do well that we need to continue to do?
Right. I think that's so important. It's important, as a law student, as someone taking the bar, and as a lawyer, this iterative process of really looking at, in a deliberative way, what did I do? How did it result? What do I need to do differently? What do I keep? Because some people just throw out everything. And it's like, well, you're probably doing something okay. Like, you got the title of the brief correct. Like,
That's
pat
right.
yourself on the back here. I think sometimes people just throw out the baby with the bathwater. It's like, well, I lost at trial, so everything we did sucked. It's like, well, that's not really necessarily true. You might have done an amazing job and you got some crazy jury. Like, that's just what happens.
Yeah, sometimes things just go badly.
Yeah, things happen. Like, anyone who's ever gone to trial, I'm sure, can tell you all kinds of crazy stories about the things that happen. And obviously, the more you do it, the more crazy things happen, right?
Yeah, and sometimes you think they're going to go badly, and they don't. We had a trial in October where we we just felt the whole time like we weren't connecting with the jury and everything was going really poorly. And so we were reporting to our client, hey, this is not
train wreck
good.
waiting to happen.
Yeah. And so we keep reporting, and there's a rep there. And so everybody's just like ready for a really bad result. Mm-hmm. And then the jury comes back and they gave a verdict for the plaintiff, which was unavoidable. It was going to happen, but It was less than we had offered to settle.
Wow.
And so we were super excited about that. And we didn't know, like, we didn't know where it came from.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a fascinating experience when we were at trial, and we hired the fake jury thing, and then, you present them all the exact same evidence. They're all in the same room, and then they split up into different juries. I think we had 3 different juries, and we were recording, and they came to different results. And it was absolutely fascinating to have that video and see how this happened. I'm like, you all watched the same thing. Like, how could you come out differently on this? And they just do.
It's amazing. And juries are their own creature, and they're completely, and that's another thing to communicate about clients about, is you don't know what a jury's going to do.
Yeah, it's totally unpredictable.
That's right. Even when you think you know and you've got everything like tucked away nice and neat, you just don't know what a jury's going to do. And that's a risk that everybody takes going into trial. Both sides take, and that's why greater than 90% of cases settle, is because you just don't know what a jury's going to do.
Yeah, I'm pretty convinced by and large you have to be totally crazy to actually go forward at trial. But just my personal opinion. All right. So finally, before we wrap up, so the final part of the book is really about developing yourself and your practice. So obviously a lot of the section is about marketing, which most lawyers dread. Can you share some strategies for actually doing the marketing that you need to do that maybe aren't so terrible?
So I also, when I got into this, just kind of dreaded that traditional marketing of going out and wining and dining and schmoozing. Like, I just hate it. And so it doesn't fit who I am and what my personality is. And so I think I talked about this some earlier. That's how I decided to take this different approach of doing a blog, writing a book, that while it hasn't necessarily, I can't point to a client and say, I have this client now because of these things. It has given me greater confidence, and it's also given me an opportunity to provide valuable material to clients that's relevant to them that I may not have otherwise had if I hadn't been writing on a topic for the blog, where I can say, hey, this just happened in Alabama. It's going to affect the work that you do in this way, and let me give this to you to help you. And so doing things for clients that builds up trust equity is something that I'm a firm believer in, because like wining and dining is fine, but there's no value in that.
Right. It's like, okay, that was a nice dinner, but really, how is this helping me in the long run?
Yeah. But if you can do things for clients that provides them a tangible benefit, then that's the sort of thing that matters.
Right. And being that trusted resource that you were talking about earlier, even if it's something kind of out of scope of what you would normally do.
Right. Well, and so that's where I try to focus my energy in marketing, is providing a different kind of resource and benefit to them than what they might get from somebody else.
Which I think makes sense. And so how do you personally stay current and be sure that you're constantly improving your own practice?
I do a lot of reading and listening to podcasts that aren't just about law, because
I noticed that in your book, you had some kind of outside resources.
Yeah, and that's really important to me, because I try to keep abreast of things in my practice areas too, but it's far more important to me to be thinking about bigger picture items, business generally, or marketing, or even just for enjoyment and pleasure. And so I listen to a lot of podcasts and a lot of audiobooks, and just do a lot of reading where I'm just getting different stimulation from different places in the market that's giving me ideas and things to think about.
And are there any books other than yours, obviously, or podcasts or other resources that you tend to recommend to people who are interested in these topics?
So many books. We could probably do an hour on like books that I like.
We probably should.
I think that's a great idea. But there's a couple books that I read on writing that were really good, and I think I included some of these in my book. Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott and Stephen King's On Writing. Both have just some really solid writing advice. I recently read a book by Donald Miller, who also has a podcast called Building a Story Brand, which has some really good ideas on marketing that I've incorporated, and it's about how we need to put our clients first. I think traditionally in marketing, people felt like it was really important to tell your client how great you were and how great your law firm is, and that's why they should do business with you.
When they're really like, okay, great, what can you do for me?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so, his book and his podcast both talk a lot about those things, and also anything by Malcolm Gladwell I will read.
Yeah, I think those are all great. I love the Anne Lamott. I think everyone should definitely read Bird by Bird if they do any sort of writing ever. If only for the idea of like the really terrible first drafts.
Oh, no doubt.
It makes everyone feel better. Like, oh, she's a really great writer and she struggles with this.
Yes, exactly.
All right. Well, we're unfortunately running out of time. Two final questions. Any final thoughts you want to share, and how can people learn more about you or get in touch with you? And also, I guess, get the book.
Yes, get the book. But I guess last thoughts are, one of the things I write about in the book is taking care of yourself. And I think that's really important. It can be overlooked because we are a busy profession that gets wrapped up in the billable hour. And I have to bill so much time a week to justify my existence that sometimes we can let our personal lives just get out of sorts. And so that's one thing I try to advocate is take care of yourself. If you have hobbies or passions, don't forget to pursue those. I know a prominent First Amendment lawyer who participates in opera because it's something that he loves. For me, my family, I have a 3-year-old, and very soon we will have a brand new baby in the house.
Oh, congratulations.
Well, thanks. And so it's really important to me to be there. I get up at 5 and start working so that I can spend an hour and a half working before I go to work. That way I can leave at 5 every day and be home to help do dinner and take care of the family and do everything before bedtime and not miss out on those important parts of my life and my family's life. So self-care is really an important part of the profession too.
Yeah, I think that's that's always an important point, because it is so easy to feel like your life is just in these 6-minute increments, and then you wake up, and it's 10 years later and your kids are in middle school or whatever, and you're like, oh, what happened? And I think, obviously that's a bigger question too, but yeah, I think that's such a great point. Well, Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, and I think I forgot to answer where people
I was
find
just
me.
realizing that. How can people find you if they want to learn more about the book or about you or the blog or all those things?
All right, so my blog is my name, jeremywrichter.com. The book, Building a Better Law Practice. It also has a website, betterlawpractice.com. It's written in ideally 6-minute increments. So I know we're really busy. I wrote it in a daily reader format. I kind of like to think of it as a lawyer devotional, so that like one day at a time, read a topic. They're mostly very practical and implementable to help you just on a daily basis be able to improve being a better lawyer. And so betterlawpractice.com is a website where that's at. And for the first couple months, it will be available exclusively at the ABA website, which is abashop.org.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
With that, we are unfortunately out of time. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app, because we'd really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. We typically release new episodes on Monday. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to Lee or Alison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.